Bama's offense with Ryan Grubb as coordinator and obviously Kalen DeBoer as head coach is an offense that's going to throw the ball around. And they love to use the tight end. So we're going to talk about one of the hottest tight end recruits in the country. That could be one of Alabama's next commitments. We're going to talk about Max Suder right here on Cover Crimson. Like, subscribe, guys, and don't forget we're brought to you by mybookie.ag. Let's get this party started. All right, there he is, Clint Lamb, Mick Gillispie, on at noon. If you guys want to catch us live or just watch anytime you want. But we appreciate you hanging out with us. CoverCrimson.com. We're talking recruiting every day. We're talking coaching. We're talking roster as Bama tries to get closer and closer to getting out on the field again. But, Clint, let's get right into it. And we're with one commitment right now. Zion Gibson, he's the loneliest guy on earth because he's the only 26 commitment to Alabama, but he's going to get some company soon. And a guy that we're keeping a close eye on is from the state of Illinois, 6'5.5". Don't forget the half, 225 pounds. And his name is Max Suder.
Good player. I always kind of start off that way. I mean, obviously there's a reason that schools are recruiting these guys, right? They're all good players. But what is it about Max Suder that kind of makes him such a desirable player? Like, for his high school team, he's kind of that Drew Sanders athlete where he's taking snaps at quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, linebacker, defensive end. I think maybe earlier in his career, he's even played some snaps at safety. This guy lines up all over the place, and it kind of makes him in some ways a tough projection because you've got so many different schools looking at him for so many different positions. Like there are schools out there that are recruiting him as kind of a stand-up edge. There are schools out there that are maybe looking at him as like more of a pure receiver. There are most schools out there are looking at him as a tight end, long term, but limited snaps there because he plays all over the place. I mean, I think you turn on his highlight tape and you might see 2, 3, 4 clips of him actually playing inline tight end. But that's not the only way to be a tight end in the modern era of college football. Like, you can be a flex guy who's more of a receiver. We've seen it with Mark Andrews. We've seen it with other guys. Kyle Pitts was a huge flex guy. Grant Calcaterra, who also played at Oklahoma and SMU, like where they're listed as a tight end, but in a lot of ways they're just a big slot. A mismatch problem can do a lot of different things. And when you turn on the tape of Mack Suder, I keep wanting to call him Max, but very impressive guy as far as athleticism, as far as size, very towering style of player. And I think, Mick, he could not only survive, but thrive in Kalen DeBoer's offense.
He is sought after. He gave his final 5, right? Bama, Illinois, Ohio State, Ole Miss, Penn State. It's a pretty good list right there that he's down to. And he is the 111th overall prospect and the number 6 tight end in the 26 class, according to our friends at On3, where you and I both used to work. And he is planning on coming to Alabama on June 20th. So he's going to take those visits. And it appears right now that the last visit's going to be Tuscaloosa. But, yeah, I mean, you just feel like when you talk tight ends, and remember that it was Danny Lewis was going to transfer, and you're like, what are you doing, man? I mean, you're going to catch the ball here. I mean, that's it. Jalen Milroe's gone. We're not going to have a running quarterback anymore.
The thing about Max Suder, yes, when you look at his finalists, he's from the state of Illinois. So Illinois being a finalist, that's not considered a big time program. It's not a flashy program, but he certainly likes, the in-state school, and they've recruited him extremely hard. But when you start looking at the offers list, the schools that didn't crack the top 5, Georgia, Auburn, Michigan, Oregon, USC, LSU, Texas, Notre Dame, Tennessee, pretty much everybody's offered this kid. But I mean, so don't think, okay, Penn State, certainly a respectable program. But a lot of times when you're looking in these final 5 or final 3 or whatever, you want to see the Georgias and the Texas and the Alabamas and the Michigans. And, that's not always how it works out. So I don't want anybody to think, okay, this guy's not being heavily pursued by the absolute best. One of the things with his ranking is, like I said, it's kind of tough to project because you're kind of looking at him as a tight end, but you probably haven't seen enough of him as a tight end to know exactly what he's going to be there. But it's also not difficult to see that he's an extremely gifted athlete. When he has been lined up in line, he seems to be willing to do the blocking side of things. Like, he's been pretty physical. There's some technical nuances to it. I guarantee you, if he ends up being more of an inline guy, or that ends up being at least part of what he does, he's going to take some time to develop on that front. But there's a willingness, you can tell on film. Whatever the kid does, he does it 100 miles an hour, and he's fun to kind of watch. I mean, I think he operates well in zone coverage. I think he's a massive mismatch problem down there in the red zone. Like, it's just, you see his high school team, they get into the red zone, it's fade, corner of the end zone, and he ends up doing extremely well going up and winning contested catch situations, climbing the ladder, doing all that stuff. He has a basketball background, which is exactly what you look for. I wouldn't say he's necessarily like super sudden or quick, which, I mean, being almost 6'7", you wouldn't expect him to be super sudden, but he still finds a way to kind of, uncover underneath on the short to intermediate stuff. But I think he also has the ability to kind of be more of a seam buster once he starts playing more of a pure tight end role. Just across the board, when you look at the traits and you look at where Kalen DeBoer is wanting to take this offense, and the tight end position and the way that they like to utilize that in the passing game to create spacing for receivers and others, a guy like Mack Sutter, I mean, he would be a massive get for Alabama, and Alabama seems to be the team that's trending for him right now.
You talked about his ability to do different things, and you mentioned it. He does a lot of different things on the field. He caught 35 passes for 505 yards and 7 touchdowns, and then he threw for 100 yards. And then on the defensive side of the ball, he had 26 tackles, 6 sacks, and an interception. So he's another one of these guys that, as you mentioned, basketball, he's a great athlete. I have always been told by people that recruit, not just in football, but in any sport, that you look for the great athletes first. Because if he's all of a sudden now just going to concentrate on tight end, then he's a great athlete. He's going to figure out how to be a great tight end.
Well, and like with Drew Sanders, he ended up being a productive edge for Alabama. He was a productive, kind of versatile chess piece for Arkansas, where he played a lot of off ball. He played some edge. A lot of people thought he could have ended up at tight end, including me, and I think he could have been a damn good player there. I think Sutter, he could also be a pretty effective player at multiple positions. But with tight ends, it's so difficult to kind of tag who are going to be guys who translate to that, because the high school level, like if you're being asked to be like a true inline tight end, a lot of times it's because, like, if you're a super athlete and you're massive, a lot of times in high school, like, they'll move you out to receiver and just have you be a massive body receiver out there that they throw the football a ton to. Like, they're not going to ask you to block a ton necessarily. So it's like understanding how a guy is going to translate from the high school level to the college level at tight end. And sometimes it's a difficult projection as far as going from college to the NFL. That's kind of where that's why you don't see a lot of tight ends ranked super highly, but you've been seeing a lot of these kind of hybrid styles of player really start to climb in the rankings. Like, Alabama's had success as far as recruiting those players in recent years, both under Nick Saban and under Kalen DeBoer. Like, you look at Amari Niblack, you look at Caleb Odom, who is, is he going to play receiver? Is he going to play tight end? You look at Marshall Pritchett, and just the fact that he kind of had a wide receiver background, started transitioning a little bit to being more of a pure tight end, or at least a hybrid tight end. And I think he was making strides in that area. Now you're looking at a lot of guys, Mark Bowman is the #1 ranked tight end, or one of the top 2 tight ends. Caden Prothrow is one of the top tight ends in the country. You look at Sutter. All these guys are they're not massive bodies yet, but they got the frame to hold a lot more weight. They got the length that you look for. They can be the mismatch problems. And in this current era of college football, like I said, just because a guy might not translate to being a 260, 265-pound inline blocker that's going to be able to move people, you can get creative. And I think Oklahoma, like back in 2016, 2017, 2018, when they had that Mark Andrews style of player, and then they also had like Grant Calcaterra coming in behind him, I think that was kind of the revolutionary flex tight end, influx into college football. And now you see it quite a bit. I think Sutter could be a massive, massive addition to Alabama's offense, regardless of if he transitions to being more of your traditional tight end, or they just use him kind of as a move guy and kind of flex him out, and more so just a big-bodied slot.
All right, we'll see what happens. He's got, like I said, visits scheduled for the summer, and he could be someone that commits to Alabama. When you look at the On3 prediction machine, it has Alabama as the favorite right now. I don't know how accurate or not that is, but it's always a good sign, Clint.
Steve Wilfong just he predicted him to Alabama. Now, he admitted this still early in the process, but kind of Alabama seems to be in the driver's seat, and right now they're getting that coveted final visit of his official visits. And so once he wraps up his officials, he said he kind of wants to have a decision made by then. Alabama would be in key position at that point. So is it going to happen anytime soon as far as his commitment? I don't think so. It'll probably be a few months, but I think right now Alabama's trending in the right direction. They're in a great spot. You got to continue to recruit him, but I like their positioning.
All right. We'll keep an eye on that and all recruiting during this time of year when, Bama's out there. They had their first junior weekend, and, there's a dead period, and then they'll be back at it again. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And, I'm looking for some guys to start committing probably by the end of the month. So we'll cover that right here on Cover Crimson. Hey, don't forget covercrimson.com. We're going to talk about the experience on Alabama's depth chart. That's something that Clint is following at Cover Crimson. We also do any kind of recruiting news. We got the message board on there. So check it out, covercrimson.com. Be a part of what we're doing there on the message board and help us out. And then mybookie.ag, we're brought to you by them. Promo code next round. Double your initial deposit. And you got March Madness coming. The SEC tournament, March Madness. Bama's still number 4, even though they lost to Auburn at home. So still one of the top teams in the country. All right, let's talk running backs and talk about experience in the running back. And I'm actually on Cover Crimson right now looking at Clint's chart on experience that players have coming back to the program right now. And I'm looking at the running backs. And I know a lot of you guys like doing the same thing as well. And obviously, Jam Miller brings back the most experience, then Richard Young, and then Daniel Hill. So those guys, Richard Young and Daniel Hill, and really Kevin Riley, they're all kind of in that same spot. What was interesting to me, Clint, is when I started to kind of look at this, I realized that there were some services out there that thought that this guy was going to transfer.
That Daniel Hill?
Yeah. And had hey, here's the destinations if he decides to transfer from Alabama. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but when you see stuff like that, I'm looking at one right now. They're like, oh, if he decides to leave, look for him to go to. And I mean, you just don't see that a lot. But Kansas,
what schools did they list to?
Kansas, Ole Miss, Arizona, Texas Tech, and Michigan.
That's first of all, interesting list. I probably wouldn't have included Mississippi State on there, even though I guess Fluff Bothwell, they added him from South Alabama. They got Booth back, who was a really good running. They have a really good running back room, so maybe that wouldn't be one to include. But Hill to me is really interesting because I have mentioned both on at covercrimson.com and some of my written stuff and on this channel that I don't know where exactly he's going to fit in. I like him. I think he's a good athlete for a guy his size. I look at what they did as far as bringing in Draylon Washington. Now, granted, you got Justice Haynes going out, you got Draylon Washington coming in. So it seems like from a climbing higher than RB4, which is essentially what he was this year, he's not really going to be in that position in 2025 either. Now, a lot can change on that front, but that's just where things are trending right now. And then you got A.K. Deere coming in, who I think is an excellent fit in Kalen DeBoer's offense. But I started thinking about Daniel Hill recently, and I wanted to at least kind of put this out there. I don't know that this will happen or would happen, but I was watching some of his high school highlights. I go back and do that, when I'm looking or evaluating players. I want to be refreshed because we didn't see a ton of them in their freshman year or maybe their first couple of years. And so I try to go get refreshed on kind of who they were as a player coming out. And he was a guy who, played actually some tight end. He played some running back. He actually was flexed out a little bit as kind of a receiver. He actually won surprisingly well downfield for a guy his size. I mean, he's a big thickly built running back. And, he put some good stuff on tape on that front. And as I'm watching him, we were talking about Mark Andrews and Grant Calcaterra and some of those 2017, 2018 Oklahoma offenses and kind of what they look like. One of the things that they did back then that I thought was so interesting at the time was they started implementing 21 personnel, 2 running backs and a tight end. But that second running back was Dimitri Flowers, who, if he was kind of listed as a fullback, but he was a really athletic guy, 6'2", 245 pounds ish. But kind of had the ability to tote the rock, but he also played a little bit as far as like being like a kind of H-back, fullback, tight end. He would get flexed a little bit. He lined up out wide some, but just the way that they utilized him, what it did was it allowed you to kind of have, in some ways, 12 personnel on the field with like the 2 tight end looks where you can line him up that way. Or you could have more 21 personnel where you got 2 true ball carriers on the field. Or you've got, Baker Mayfield can run the football a little bit, not a whole lot of design runs for him, but whether you're talking about, really, especially Keelan Russell, but even like Ty Simpson, he could have some design quarterback runs. But when you start thinking about straining defenses and the different ways that you could do that, Alabama's going to have the inline tight end, H-back tight end style of duo with Josh Cuevas and Danny Lewis, and we've talked about that extensively. But what if you started getting Daniel Hill involved in a way where you could have that same flexibility that Dimitri Flowers provided, where you can kind of have 2 ball carriers at any moment on the field. You can use him and kind of have 12 personnel. If he's willing to do the blocking side of things, he's got that Swiss Army knife type of ability. And you look at Alabama's running back room, and it could be the fact that they were kind of trying to head off a guy like Daniel Hill or Kevin Riley or someone else potentially transferring who might not be projected to be one of the top 3 or 4 running backs. But it also could be that they could get maybe a little bit flexible with a guy like Daniel Hill and use him in some different ways. And maybe he ends up being, Justin Fowler is who we've compared him to. But, Dimitri Flowers and his versatility and kind of how it strained defenses back then, I wonder if at some point in his career, maybe Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb and company could implement him in a similar way in Alabama's offense.
Well, you talk about his size. I mean, he's like a big battering ram, right? And maybe that's something that they could take advantage of as well. I mean, being that he is so big and strong. I'm with you. And not only that, he's a really great athlete. I mean, remember now, he came in with track titles in the 110-meter hurdles and the 300-meter hurdles from Meridian, Mississippi. He can squat like 725 pounds. Like I got him listed at 6 foot 235 with great hurdling ability. You can figure out a way to use this guy. You know what? It could be third downs. I don't know how his hands are on catching passes, but to have
good hands.
They had Milroe for this last year, right? Like, hey, I'm just going to run the quarterback. You're not going to have that this year,
right?
So that's going to open up a guy like Hill to come in and maybe be that guy, that third and fourth down back. He could get into the end zone a lot.
Exactly. And that kind of Dimitri Flowers, he didn't run the football a ton, but he did get some carries out of the backfield. He had like 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns during that 2017 season. So they had him in short yardage situations. He didn't have a high yards per carry, but he was situationally used there. But a lot of pop passes, they'd have him as far as like the delayed stuff and then getting up the seam real quick. They would hit him in those ways. And I'm talking about it was beautifully designed by Lincoln Riley. But not only did you have the versatility of him and what that could do, you essentially could have 21 personnel or you could have 12 personnel. But Mark Andrews, he was not really a true inline tight end. Like he was a guy who was flexed. He was either flexed into the slot or out wide 90% of his snaps during that 2017 season. So he was essentially just a big slot, which is what we've talked about with some of these other guys. But what it did do was at any given moment, I wouldn't say he was the best blocker, or he really wasn't never willing to be a great blocker, but you could get in and out of so many different looks, 21 personnel, 12 personnel, 11 personnel with just one running back and one tight end. You could do a lot of different things. And I remember, and granted, defenses, they study these things, they catch up, they figure out how to combat it a little bit. I'm not saying you make that the entire offense like Oklahoma did. But if you could have that kind of wrinkle with a specific piece like Daniel Hill, on top of like using, like I said, you'll still have the typical duo tight end, the H and the Y with Cuevas and Danny Lewis, or maybe some other guys get involved, Caleb Edwards or Marshall Pritchett or whatever. But having that wrinkle where you can kind of throw that into the mix, and it's just something else that defenses have to prepare for. And I'm looking at it and saying, if I was a coach, who are some guys that maybe we could mimic how they were used that would really utilize some of our personnel and put strain on opposing defenses? And Daniel Hill, is he ever going to be an NFL running back? It's possible he could just be an absolute hammer. But to me, I think he would become an NFL style of player. If he would embrace this special teams role, dominate on that front where he could be one of those styles of player that contributes as kind of a core four on special teams, but on top of being kind of a Swiss Army knife who does different things, plays fullback, plays H-back, plays tight end, you flex him a little bit, plays some goal line running back, maybe even do some wildcat quarterback stuff, which Dimitri Flowers did that at times too. You're probably not going to do that with Daniel Hill too much, but I'm saying that, we're trying to get creative, and it's the off season, and it's just kind of a talking point. I like to look at some of these things and just see how it maybe would fit. I mean, Daniel Hill, I think he's a guy who, as a pure running back, compared to some of the others in this Kalen DeBoer offense, I wouldn't say I was down on him, but I'm like, man, where does he fit in? Because I'd love to see him get some more opportunities, but at whose expense? Do I think Jam Miller's going to fall by the wayside? No. Do I think Richard Young's going to fall by the wayside? Draylon Washington was brought in for a reason. I love A.K. Deere and his fit. He's a true freshman. Probably won't have a massive role unless he just steps up and things translate for him rather quickly, but he's probably going to want to get some action. The transfer portal era, guys will get out of here. So, like, where does Daniel Hill and for that matter, Kevin Riley fit into all this? For Daniel Hill specifically, I think there's something you can do to keep him involved and make him kind of a niche player.
Yeah, and that's how a lot of guys get on the field before it's their time to be the starter. And that's what Kalen DeBoer, I think, has done a really good job of. I mean, throughout the season, saying, hey, Clint's going to get some snaps today. Why? Well, because he earned them in practice. And at least it keeps you involved. And then you feel like you're at least getting on the field a little bit as you bide your time before it's your time to start, before you got that experience. So, we'll see what happens there, but it's always a good running back room at Alabama. I mean, always, right? And you talk about A.K. Deere coming in. I mean, he's an exciting true freshman, but Bama lost Justice Haynes, but I don't feel like they lost a whole lot out of the room. I mean, he was good. I think he has the potential to be really good, but there's all these other guys that can run the ball too, and that's been a strength of Alabama since Alabama's been playing football. I mean, you can go back to Johnny Musso. We've just had, we've had guys that can run the ball, right? Bobby Humphrey, even
during the down years.
Yeah. Sean Alexander. I don't even have to get the Saban guys. Bama's been running the football since they've been running football.
Kenneth Darby, Ray Hudson,
Coffee.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just even like during the down years where Alabama was struggling, they always have seemed to have running backs. It's I think the running back room, what's really going to elevate it or help it is the fact that it's going to be used in more of a traditional way. Right. You won't have the running quarterback taking away so much volume. You will still have some of that volume taken away through more pass attempts. Like, I think quarterback runs is going to decrease drastically, but I think pass attempts is going to increase pretty drastically. But what will happen is not only will the running backs get some more opportunities, but most of the run game will be funneled through them. They will be the focal points rather than, okay, it's a zone read. They might get the football, they might not. Like, that's how you end up with games like where some of your guys, Justice Haynes is getting 2 or 3 carries in the game. Haynes is like, they just posted a video of him going through some drills and stuff at Michigan, some of those running back drills, and it just reminds you of how fantastic that cat looks in those types of settings. Vision for him is something that I still would like to see a little bit more of. He at times he ran like a Mack truck. I mean, but there were other times where it's like it felt like he probably could have been running a little bit harder. He might not have been 100%, right. Or it might just be him really not seeing it. But I could see him breaking out from Michigan and becoming the back that we all expected him to become Bama fans don't want to admit that, but it is possible. I could also see it being a possibility of him kind of struggling in Ann Arbor in the same way that he struggled at times in Tuscaloosa.
If I don't mention Major Ogilvy, I'm going to get attacked on here as a great Alabama running back. We could sit here and talk about running backs all day. What about Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry? I mean, like you.
Oh yeah, it's not
so
even
much fun though. Like when you look at the room and you just don't know who that next guy is possibly going to be. But I could definitely see Jam having a fantastic season. I know that Bama doesn't run the ball with DeBoer like they used to with Saban, but it doesn't mean that a running back couldn't just bust out there and have, especially somebody that can catch like him. One of those seasons where you put him in the mix of some of the all-time greats.
That's 100% correct. And I've talked a lot. I think the volume for a collective group of running backs might not be there to the extent that maybe we've seen in the past. Like we've talked a lot about what helped Alabama be able to have a committee of running backs that were all productive back when Tua was the quarterback. Like they had a lot of passing success, but it was done on very limited passing attempts. You had Tua averaging over 11 yards per attempt. And so you could kind of, it was just a bunch of explosive plays because you had the wideouts and then you had a stable of running backs in the backfield where you can get them enough volume where you can have 2, 3, to some extent, maybe even 4 guys involved in your rotation. I don't think it's going to be that way. I do think there will be some explosiveness of the offense. I think it'll be a very efficient offense as far as the passing game, but they're going to have more pass attempts, in my opinion, than unless, if Ty Simpson ends up being the starter, but for whatever reason, he's kind of limited in some ways, they might not put a huge volume of passes on his shoulders, but I wouldn't really expect that to be the case. I think they're going to throw the football around. It'll be more so about being very efficient on the ground with the running backs that are getting their touches, like getting all those guys up there in the high 5 yard per carry, low 6 yard per carry marks. And so while they might not get the volume, in some ways that will showcase your ability as a running back for NFL evaluators and show what you can do, but it also limits the tread on your tires. So it can be very beneficial to kind of be a part of the committee as long as when you're getting those snaps or those carries in particular, they're able to kind of showcase your talent for the next level. I think Kalen DeBoer's offense, Ryan Grubb's offense, will do a very good job of that.
Yep. And they might not have Wilbur Jackson or Tony Nathan, but they'll have some other guys that can run the football, right? The funny thing to me, Clint, as we kind of wrap things up is that there's a group of Alabama fans that are like the old school guys, right? And they remember the Wilbur Jacksons and the Tony Nathans and the Major Ogilvies. And then there's a group of Alabama fans that only remember the Saban era, and then there's guys like me that remember the Stallings and Dubose. But one thing that's consistent is that there's Bama running backs every single year. Somebody can tote the rock, and Alabama's been a school known for that. Great breakdown. And if you guys want Clint to break down another player, make sure you get in the comment section and let us know, because no one gives you a better breakdown of players and what they do on the field than my partner right there, Clint Lamb. And you just heard it. So Clint, you did a great job again today. And you guys let me know who on the roster is someone that you're like, what is Alabama going to do with this guy? Or how can this guy contribute to the team right now? And here's a player that, like I said, there was a list of schools that were speculated that he was going to transfer to, and he stuck around, but how do you use a big guy with that type of athleticism? Obviously, we just talked about it. So you guys get in the comment section. Let us know. We'll also be covering recruiting, all that at covercrimson.com. MyBookie.ag promo code for obviously doubling your initial deposit. Get on there and have a little bit of fun on there as well. And again, it's like my hat, the next round, and like, subscribe, thumbs up. Clint, did I miss anything?
Nope. You got it all covered, brother. This was fun, man. Love talking about recruiting, but I also love still touching on some of the current guys and how they're going to fit in.
We'll do it again tomorrow, guys. Talk to you at noon or whenever you watch the show. Roll